Donald Fuller stood at the altar of the Grand Peninsula Hotel ballroom, his chest swelling with satisfaction. Any minute now, his pathetic ex-wife would shuffle through those doors, broken, helpless, clinging to someone's arm like the burden she'd become. He'd made sure the invitation reached her. He wanted April to see what a real woman looked like, what success looked like, what he deserved. But when the ballroom doors swept open, the string quartet fell silent mid-note. A sleek black limousine idled at the red carpet entrance, its chrome gleaming under the afternoon sun. The chauffeur stepped out, opened the rear door, and extended his white-gloved hand. April Waits emerged, not the trembling, desperate woman Donald had cast aside for years ago. This April wore an emerald gown that flowed like liquid silk, her blonde hair swept into an elegant twist. Dark designer sunglasses shielded her eyes, and in her right hand, she held a slim white cane, not as a crutch, but as an accessory of power. But it was the two small hands gripping hers that made the crowd gasp. Twin boys, no older than 3, stepped out beside her. Identical, golden-haired, dressed in tiny cream suits with bow ties that matched their mother's confident smile. Donald's heart stopped. The bride beside him, Veronica, turned slowly, her bouquet trembling in her grip. "Donald," she whispered, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "Who are those children?" April moved forward, her sons flanking her like young princes. She didn't stumble, didn't hesitate. She walked with the serene grace of a woman who had conquered every demon her ex-husband had left her with, and built an empire from the ashes. The click of her heels echoed through the ballroom like a judge's gavel. Donald Fuller had wanted to humiliate his blind ex-wife. Instead, he was about to lose everything. The penthouse overlooked Central Park, floor-to-ceiling windows framing Manhattan like a photograph of power. April stood at those windows once, her fingers pressed against the cold glass, watching the city lights blur into streaks of gold and white. That was before the accident, before the darkness swallowed everything. Now she sat on the edge of their king-sized bed, her hands folded in her lap, listening to Donald's footsteps pace the marble floor of their bedroom. She knew that walk, quick, impatient, the rhythm of a man who had already made his decision and was simply waiting for the right moment to deliver the blow. "April." His voice was sharp, businesslike. The voice he used in board meetings, not with his wife of 6 years. "Yes." She turned her head toward the sound, her eyes, still a striking blue but now vacant, unfocused, fixed somewhere past his shoulder. "This isn't working." The words landed like ice water. April's throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "What do you mean?" Donald exhaled, the kind of theatrical sigh he used when explaining something obvious to someone he considered beneath him. "You know exactly what I mean. Look at you. Look at us. I'm 34 years old, April. I'm the CEO of Fuller Enterprises. I have investors to meet, galas to attend, appearances to maintain. And you." He paused, and April could hear the disdain dripping from his silence. "You can't even walk across a room without bumping into furniture." April's hands clenched in her lap. "I'm getting better. The therapist said." "I don't care what the therapist said." Donald's voice rose, frustration bleeding through his polished exterior. "Every time we go somewhere, people stare. They whisper. That's Donald Fuller's wife, the blind one. Do you understand how that makes me look? How that makes you look?" April's voice cracked. "Donald, I lost my sight 6 months ago. I'm trying. I'm learning to adapt. I thought you loved me. I thought we were in this together." "Together?" Donald laughed, cold and bitter. "April, I need a partner. Someone who can stand beside me at events, who can host dinners, who doesn't need to be handled like a liability. You're not that person anymore." April stood, her legs shaking but her spine straight. "So what are you saying?" The rustle of paper cut through the silence. Donald stepped closer, and April heard something slide across the nightstand. "I'm saying this marriage is over. My lawyer drew up the papers this morning. Sign them." April's breath caught. You're divorcing me? Because I'm blind? I'm divorcing you because you're a burden." Donald's words were methodical, deliberate, each syllable designed to wound. "You're not the woman I married. That woman was confident, beautiful, useful. Now you're just broken. And I don't do broken, April. I never have." Tears slid down April's cheeks, but she refused to sob. She refused to give him that satisfaction. "I stood by you when you had nothing. When your company was failing, when your father cut you off, when..." And I repaid you by giving you this life. Donald gestured around the penthouse, forgetting she couldn't see it. The clothes, the cars, the lifestyle. But now you're a weight around my neck, dragging me down. Sign the papers, April. Take the settlement I'm offering, $50,000, and move on. 50,000. April's voice was barely a whisper. We have millions. You're offering me. You'll be lucky to get that, Donald snapped. The prenup is ironclad. You were nothing when I met you, and you'll be nothing when you leave. But hey, his tone shifted, mocking. At least now you have an excuse. April reached out, her fingers trembling as they found the edge of the nightstand. She felt the cold, smooth paper of the divorce documents beneath her hand. For a moment, she considered refusing, fighting, screaming. But what was the point? Donald Fuller had already decided she was worthless. I'll sign, she whispered. Good. Donald's footsteps moved toward the door. I want you out by morning. And April? He paused. Don't bother trying to contact me. You're not my problem anymore. The door clicked shut. April stood alone in the darkness that had become her entire world. She sank back onto the bed, her chest heaving with silent sobs, her hands pressed over her mouth to muffle the sound. She had lost everything. Her sight, her husband, her home. But what Donald Fuller didn't know, what he couldn't possibly imagine, was that April Waits was far stronger than he ever gave her credit for. And 4 years later, when she walked into his wedding with her twin sons and a fortune of her own making, Donald would finally understand the biggest mistake of his life. He hadn't just lost a wife. He'd thrown away the only woman who ever truly loved him. And now, she was about to make him pay for it. Donald Fuller was the kind of man who measured his worth in zeros, the ones that followed the numbers in his bank account, the ones that trailed behind his net worth in Forbes magazine. At 34, he had built Fuller Enterprises from a struggling tech startup into a billion-dollar empire, and he wore his success like armor. Custom Italian suits, a Patek Philippe watch that cost more than most people's houses, a penthouse that touched the clouds. Everything about Donald screamed power, control, perfection. He had no tolerance for weakness, no patience for failure, and absolutely no room in his life for anything or anyone that didn't enhance his carefully crafted image. April Waits had been the perfect accessory once. Beautiful, graceful, devoted. She had stood beside him at charity galas in designer gowns, laughed at his investors' jokes, played the role of the ideal billionaire's wife with effortless charm. For 6 years, she had been exactly what he needed. Then came the accident. A taxi ran a red light on Fifth Avenue. April had been crossing the street, her arms full of shopping bags, returning from picking up Donald's dry cleaning. The impact threw her 15 feet. When she woke up in the hospital 3 days later, the world had gone dark. Traumatic optic neuropathy, the doctors said. Irreversible. Permanent blindness. Donald visited her twice in the hospital. Both times, he spent more time on his phone than holding her hand. Now, 6 months later, April had learned to navigate their penthouse with careful, measured steps. She'd memorized the layout, 20 paces from the bedroom to the bathroom, 15 from the kitchen island to the dining table. She'd started therapy, learned to use a cane, tried to adapt to a world she could no longer see. But the one thing she couldn't navigate was the growing coldness in her husband's voice. April. Donald's footsteps echoed across the marble floor, sharp and impatient. She was sitting on the living room sofa, her fingers tracing the pages of a Braille book she'd been trying to learn. We need to talk. She lifted her head, her unseeing eyes turning toward the sound of his voice. Of course. What is it? The rustle of paper made her stomach clench. She knew that sound. Crisp, official, final. I've had my lawyers draw up divorce papers. His voice was flat, businesslike, as if he were discussing a merger instead of ending their marriage. I need you to sign them. April's breath caught. Her hands tightened around the book in her lap. What? Donald, what are you talking about? I'm talking about reality. He moved closer, and she could smell his cologne. Expensive, familiar, now suffocating. Look, April, I tried to make this work. I really did. But let's be honest. You're not the woman I married anymore. I'm still me, she whispered, her voice trembling. I'm still your wife. I still love you. Love doesn't pay the bills. Love doesn't close deals. Donald's tone hardened. Every time we go somewhere, I have to explain you. I have to watch people stare, whisper, pity me. Do you know what it's like to be Donald Fuller and have people feel sorry for you? You're a liability, April. An emotional and social liability. You don't fit my brand anymore. The words hit like physical blows. April's hands began to shake. Your brand? Donald, I'm your wife, not a business decision. Everything is a business decision. He placed the papers on the coffee table with a decisive thud. I'm offering you $50,000. That's more than generous considering the prenup. Sign the papers, pack your things, and be out by morning. 50,000. April's voice cracked. We have millions. You're giving me $50,000 after 6 years. You came into this marriage with nothing, Donald said coldly. You'll leave with more than you deserved. Sign the papers, April. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Tears streamed down her face, but she couldn't see them fall. She couldn't see the disgust in Donald's eyes, the way he looked at her like she was something broken he needed to discard. But she could hear it in every word, feel it in the silence that followed. Her hands found the pen he'd placed beside the papers. They shook so violently she could barely grip it, but she signed. What choice did she have? Good. Donald's footsteps retreated toward the bedroom. I have an early meeting. I want you gone when I get back. April sat frozen on the sofa, clutching her white cane like a lifeline, listening to her husband pack an overnight bag in the next room. When the penthouse door finally clicked shut, she allowed herself to break. Her sobs echoed through the cavernous space, the space that had been her home, her prison, her entire world. By dawn, April stood at the elevator with a single suitcase and her cane. The doorman offered to help her into a taxi, his voice thick with pity. She declined. She would accept no one's pity ever again. Sarah's apartment was nothing like the penthouse. It was a 2-bedroom walk-up in Brooklyn, with creaking floorboards and radiators that clanged at night. But when April collapsed into her sister's arms at the door, suitcase abandoned at her feet, it felt more like home than any marble palace ever had. I've got you, Sarah whispered, guiding April inside. I've got you, sis. You're safe now. Safe. The word felt foreign. April hadn't felt safe in months. Not since the accident. Not since Donald's coldness had begun to freeze her out of her own life. But here, in Sarah's modest living room with its worn sofa and mismatched furniture, something inside her finally gave way. She cried for 3 days straight. Sarah sat with her through all of it, holding her hand, bringing her tea that went cold, murmuring reassurances that felt hollow against the enormity of April's loss. It wasn't just the divorce. It wasn't just being blind. It was the sudden, crushing realization that the man she'd loved, the man she'd built her entire world around, had never really loved her at all. How could I have been so stupid? April sobbed on the 4th morning, her voice raw from crying. She sat at Sarah's small kitchen table, her fingers wrapped around a mug she couldn't see. 6 years, Sarah? 6 years I gave him. I supported him when his company was failing. I stood by him when his father disowned him. I believed him when he said we were a team. You weren't stupid, Sarah said firmly, sitting across from her. You were in love. There's a difference. Is there? April's laugh was bitter. Because I feel pretty stupid right now. He called me a liability. He said I didn't fit his brand anymore, like I was some kind of product he could just return. And you know what the worst part is? I signed those papers. I didn't fight. I just gave up. Sarah reached across the table, squeezing April's hand. You were in shock. Anyone would have been. What he did to you was cruel and unforgivable. But April, you're still here. You're still breathing. That means you can still fight back. Fight back. The words should have inspired her, but instead, they felt like an impossible dream. How could she fight back when she couldn't even walk to the bathroom without counting steps? When every simple task, pouring coffee, getting dressed, crossing a room, required concentration and effort. When the darkness pressed in from all sides, suffocating and absolute. The first weeks were agony. April spent most of her time on Sarah's sofa, listening to the sounds of the city through the thin walls. Car horns, sirens, neighbors arguing, children playing in the courtyard below. The world moved on without her, indifferent to her pain, while she remained frozen in place, afraid to move, afraid to try, afraid to fail. Sarah worked as a nurse, pulling double shifts to make rent. She'd leave before dawn and return after dark, exhausted but always patient, always encouraging. She'd guide April around the apartment, narrating every detail, helping her build a mental map of her new reality. 12 steps from the bedroom to the bathroom. 8 steps from the kitchen to the living room. The light switch was on the left. The coffee maker beeped twice when it was ready. But knowing the layout didn't make it easier. April bumped into door frames, knocked over water glasses, tripped over the coffee table she'd forgotten to account for. Each mistake felt like proof that Donald had been right. She was broken, useless, a burden. One evening, 3 weeks after moving in, April was feeling her way to the kitchen when her foot caught on the rug. She went down hard, her knee cracking against the floor, pain shooting up her leg. She lay there, sprawled on the ground, and something inside her snapped. "I can't do this," she screamed into the empty apartment. "I can't do this anymore." But the apartment didn't answer. The darkness didn't lift. And somewhere in that silence, April realized something profound. Her true blindness hadn't been losing her sight. Her true blindness had been loving a man who saw her as an accessory, who valued appearances over loyalty, who discarded her the moment she became inconvenient. She'd been blind to Donald's cruelty, his selfishness, his complete lack of empathy. She'd been blind to her own worth, measuring herself by his standards instead of her own. The accident had taken her vision, but Donald had taken something far worse, her sense of self. April pushed herself up slowly, wiping her tears with shaking hands. Her knee throbbed, but she stood anyway, gripping the kitchen counter for support. "No more," she whispered to the darkness. "No more crying. No more giving up." She didn't know how yet. She didn't know where to start. But somewhere in the depths of her grief, a tiny spark of defiance flickered to life. Donald Fuller thought he'd destroyed her. He was about to learn how wrong he was. The rehabilitation center smelled like antiseptic and determination. April sat in a plastic chair, her white cane propped against her knee, listening to the orientation and mobility instructor explain how to navigate stairs. Around her, she could hear others, footsteps shuffling, canes tapping, voices calling out encouragement. She wasn't alone in her darkness. That realization should have comforted her, but instead, it made her angry. Angry at Donald. Angry at the taxi driver. Angry at herself for wasting 3 weeks wallowing in self-pity. "Mrs. Fuller?" The instructor's voice pulled her back. "Are you ready to begin?" April stood, gripping her cane with renewed purpose. "It's Ms. Waits now. And yes, I'm ready." The therapy was brutal. Learning to trust her remaining senses felt like building a new language from scratch. She learned to identify textures by touch, to navigate by counting steps and listening for echoes, to read Braille until her fingertips ached. But April attacked each lesson with fierce determination, staying late, practicing until the instructors had to force her to go home. Sarah noticed the change immediately. "You're different," she said one evening, watching April confidently pour her own coffee without spilling a drop. "I'm tired of being helpless," April replied, her voice steady. "Donald threw me away because he thought I was broken. I'm going to prove him wrong." The emotional counseling was harder than the physical therapy. Dr. Patricia Chun was a soft-spoken woman with kind eyes April couldn't see, but could hear in every carefully chosen word. In their sessions, April unpacked 6 years of marriage, peeling back layers of manipulation she hadn't recognized at the time. Donald's subtle criticisms, his need for control, the way he'd isolated her from friends and family, making her world smaller until he was the center of everything. "He groomed you to need him," Dr. Chen explained during one session. "And when you truly needed him, he abandoned you. That says everything about his character and nothing about your worth." April absorbed those words like oxygen. For the first time since the accident, she began to see clearly, not with her eyes, but with her mind. She began to understand that her value had never been tied to Donald's approval. She had skills, intelligence, and resilience that existed completely independent of him. It was during a frustrating afternoon trying to use her laptop with screen reading software that inspiration struck. The technology was clunky, the interface counterintuitive, the experience maddeningly inefficient. April had been a marketing consultant before the accident, with a degree in business and communications. She understood user experience. She understood need. And she understood, intimately, what blind users needed that they weren't getting. April spent the next 3 months researching obsessively. She attended support groups, interviewed other visually impaired individuals, identified pain points in existing assistive technology. Her sharp mind, freed from the constant effort of pleasing Donald, came alive with possibilities. She drafted business plans on her laptop, her fingers flying across the keyboard as screen-reading software narrated her words back to her. She made calls to developers, designers, investors. "You want to start a tech company?" Sarah asked one evening, equal parts amazed and concerned. "April, you have $50,000. That's barely enough to live on for a year, let alone launch a startup." "Then I'll make it work," April said simply. "I spent 6 years supporting Donald's dreams. It's time to build my own." The pitch meetings were terrifying. April walked into conference rooms filled with venture capitalists she couldn't see, armed with nothing but a prototype, a business plan, and unshakable conviction. Some investors dismissed her immediately. Others listened politely before declining. But April kept going, refining her pitch, adjusting her approach, refusing to accept defeat. Then she met Marcus Webb, a veteran investor who'd made his fortune in assistive technology after his daughter lost her hearing in childhood. He listened to April's entire presentation without interrupting, his questions sharp and insightful. When she finished, silence stretched between them. "Ms. Waits," Marcus finally said, "I've heard a lot of pitches in my career, but I've never heard one delivered with such clarity of purpose. You're not just building software. You're building dignity." April felt tears prick her eyes, but she kept her voice steady. "That's exactly what I'm building, Mr. Webb. Dignity." Marcus invested $300,000 in seed funding. Within a month, April had assembled a small team of developers and designers. She rented a modest office space in a shared co-working building, hired her first employees, and officially launched April Tech Solutions, a company dedicated to creating intuitive, elegant assistive technology that treated blind users not as an afterthought, but as the priority. On launch day, April stood in her new office, listening to her team celebrate around her. She couldn't see the space, but she could feel it, the energy, the possibility, the future she was building with her own hands. Sarah hugged her tightly. "I'm so proud of you." April smiled, a real smile, the first in months. "I'm proud of me too." She'd lost her sight. She'd lost her husband. She'd lost the life she'd thought she wanted. But she'd found something infinitely more valuable. She'd found herself. 18 months after launch, April Tech Solutions had grown from a modest startup to a company generating $2 million in annual revenue. Their flagship product, an AI-powered navigation app that used spatial audio and haptic feedback, had won 3 industry awards and changed thousands of lives. April had been featured in Forbes, TechCrunch, and the Wall Street Journal. Investors who'd once dismissed her now called begging for meetings. But success brought new challenges. The company had outgrown its co-working space, and April needed to find a proper office, one designed with accessibility at its core, not as an afterthought. That's how she met Michael Chun. "Ms. Waits." His voice was warm, genuine, with none of the performative enthusiasm she'd grown accustomed to from people who wanted something from her. "I'm Michael Chun. Thank you for considering my firm for your new office design." April extended her hand, and Michael shook it firmly, not too tight, not too gentle, just right. "Thank you for meeting with me, Mr. Chun. I have very specific requirements." "I read your brief," he said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "You want a space that works seamlessly for visually impaired employees and clients, but doesn't feel clinical or institutional. You want it to be elegant, functional, and dignified." April tilted her head, intrigued. Most architects had tried to talk over her specifications, assuming they knew better. "Exactly. Can you deliver that?" "I can," Michael said simply. "But I'd like to understand your vision first. What does dignity in design mean to you?" They talked for 2 hours. Michael asked thoughtful questions, took extensive notes, and never once suggested he knew her needs better than she did. He described his previous work in accessible architecture, schools for deaf children, rehabilitation centers, adaptive housing, with the passion of someone who viewed design as service, not ego. When he left, April sat in her office, struck by an unfamiliar feeling. Respect. Michael had treated her like an expert, a partner, a person whose input mattered. Not because she was blind and he pitied her, but because she was brilliant and he recognized it. Over the next 3 months, As Michael designed the new office space, they developed an easy rapport. He'd visit with fabric samples, inviting April to feel different textures. He'd describe color palettes in ways that helped her envision the space. This blue is calm, like dawn over water, or this gray is sophisticated, like good charcoal. He consulted her on every decision, incorporating her feedback without defensiveness. "You're different from other architects I've worked with," April said one afternoon as they reviewed the final plans. Michael was quiet for a moment. "My sister is deaf," he finally said. "Growing up, I watched people either ignore her or treat her like she was fragile. But she's one of the strongest people I know. She taught me that disability doesn't diminish someone. It's the world's failure to accommodate them that does. I design spaces that don't make that failure." April felt something shift in her chest. "Your sister is lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have her," Michael said softly. "Just like your team is lucky to have you." The office opened to rave reviews. But what surprised April was how much she missed Michael's visits. She found herself thinking about his voice, the way he listened completely before speaking, the gentle humor that colored their conversations. When he called to invite her to dinner, not business, just dinner, if you'd like, April's heart raced in a way it hadn't since before the accident. Their first date was at a quiet Italian restaurant in the West Village. Michael described the menu in vivid detail, never making April feel rushed or incompetent. He talked about architecture, his family, his dreams. He asked about her company, her vision for the future, her favorite books. He made her laugh, genuinely laugh, for the first time in years. "Can I ask you something personal?" Michael said as they shared tiramisu. April stiffened slightly. "Go ahead. How do you do it? Build something from nothing after everything you went through." April considered the question carefully. "I stopped waiting for the world to accommodate me and started building the world I wanted to live in. I stopped letting my ex-husband's voice in my head tell me I was broken." "You're not broken," Michael said, his voice firm. "You're extraordinary." The word hung between them, sincere and unjudging. April felt tears threaten, but they were different from the tears she'd shed in Sarah's apartment. These were tears of recognition, of being seen, truly seen, for who she was, not what she'd lost. They began dating slowly, carefully. Michael never pushed, never assumed, never treated April's blindness as something to overcome or fix. He valued her sharp mind, her wicked sense of humor, her fierce independence. When they walked together, he didn't grab her arm. He offered his, letting her choose whether to take it. When they talked, he listened like her words were treasures. 6 months into their relationship, lying in Michael's apartment after a quiet dinner, April realized something profound. She'd spent 6 years with Donald feeling invisible, despite having sight. Now, blind, with Michael, she felt more seen than ever before. "What are you thinking?" Michael asked, his fingers gently tracing patterns on her hand. April smiled. "I'm thinking that losing my sight was the worst thing that ever happened to me. And somehow, also the best." Michael kissed her forehead. "I'm glad you can see that." April laughed, swatting his arm. "Terrible pun." "I know," he said, grinning. "But you love it." And she did. God help her, she absolutely did. The wedding took place in Sarah's backyard on a warm September afternoon, with 20 guests and a string quartet playing Pachelbel's canon. April wore a simple cream dress that Sarah had helped her choose, her fingers tracing the delicate lace at the sleeves. She didn't need to see it to know it was perfect. She could feel it in the way the fabric moved, in the way Michael's breath caught when she walked toward him. "You're beautiful," he whispered as she took his hand. "How can you tell?" April teased, tears already threatening. "Because I can see you," Michael said, and she knew he meant it in every possible way. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves. Michael promised to be her partner, not her caretaker, to challenge her when she needed pushing and support her when she needed rest. April promised to never stop building, creating, and fighting for the world they both believed in. When the officiant pronounced them married, the small gathering erupted in applause, and April felt Michael's lips meet hers with a gentleness that made her heart soar. This was nothing like her first wedding, the ostentatious affair Donald had orchestrated at the Plaza Hotel, with 500 guests and a price tag that could have funded a small country. That wedding had been about spectacle, about image, about showing the world what Donald Fuller could afford. This wedding was about love. Simple, honest, unshakable love. At the reception, Sarah pulled April aside, her voice thick with emotion. "I never thought I'd see you this happy again." "Neither did I," April admitted, squeezing her sister's hand. "Thank you for not letting me give up." "You never gave up," Sarah said. "You just needed time to remember who you were." Life with Michael was a revelation. He'd moved into April's condo, the one she'd bought with her own money, in her own name, and they built a life together that felt like breathing. He cooked breakfast while describing the sunrise. She worked late while he sketched building designs at the kitchen table. They talked about everything and nothing, their conversations flowing with the ease of two people who genuinely liked each other, not just loved each other. 3 months after the wedding, April woke up feeling strange. Nauseous. Exhausted. She'd been pushing hard at work, closing a major deal with a national retailer to integrate their navigation app into stores nationwide. She assumed it was stress. But when the nausea persisted for a week, Michael insisted she see a doctor. Dr. Rachel Morrison was April's longtime physician, a no-nonsense woman who'd seen her through the darkest days after the accident. She ran a blood test, examined April thoroughly, and then went quiet for a long moment. "April," Dr. Morrison said carefully, "you're pregnant." April froze. Her hand instinctively moved to her stomach, flat and unremarkable. "I'm what?" "About 8 weeks along," the doctor confirmed. "Congratulations." The news hit April like lightning. Pregnant. She was going to be a mother. She and Michael were going to have a baby. 1,000 emotions crashed over her at once. Joy, terror, wonder, disbelief. "There's something else," Dr. Morrison said, and April's heart clenched. "I'd like to do an ultrasound to confirm, but based on your hormone levels, I suspect you might be carrying multiples." 20 minutes later, April lay on the examination table, gel cold on her abdomen, listening to the ultrasound technician move the wand across her skin. Michael gripped her hand tightly, his breathing shallow with anticipation. "Well," the technician said, his voice warm with excitement, "Dr. Morrison was right. Congratulations, you're having twins." April couldn't breathe. Twins. 2 babies. 2 miracles. "Are they healthy?" Michael asked, his voice cracking. "Perfectly healthy," the technician confirmed. 2 strong heartbeats. Both measuring right on track. April burst into tears, her free hand covering her mouth as sobs shook her body. Michael leaned down, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips, his own tears falling freely. "We're having twins," April whispered, wonder coloring every syllable. "Michael, we're having twins." That evening, they sat on their balcony, April's head resting on Michael's shoulder, his hand protective over her stomach. The city hummed below them, alive and indifferent, while they existed in their own perfect bubble of joy. "Are you scared?" Michael asked softly. April considered the question. A few years ago, she would have been terrified. Blind and pregnant? Impossible. She would have believed Donald's voice in her head, telling her she was inadequate, incapable, a liability. But that voice was gone now, replaced by something stronger. Her own voice. Her own truth. "No," April said, and meant it. "I'm not scared. I built a company from nothing. I learned to navigate a world I can't see. I survived the worst betrayal of my life and came out stronger. If I can do all that, I can definitely raise 2 babies." Michael laughed, kissing the top of her head. "You're incredible, you know that?" April smiled, her hand joining his on her stomach. "My vision is gone," she whispered, "but my life has never been clearer." In that moment, surrounded by love and possibility, April understood something profound. Donald had thrown her away because he thought she was broken, that her blindness made her worthless. But her blindness had given her clarity. It had stripped away the superficial, forced her to see what truly mattered. And what mattered was this: love, family, purpose, building something meaningful with someone who valued her completely. Donald Fuller had taken her sight, but he'd given her something far more valuable, the chance to see clearly for the first time in her life. Donald Fuller stood in his penthouse, the same penthouse he'd shared with April, watching Veronica twirl in her 4th wedding dress option. She was stunning, a former model with legs that went on for miles, platinum blonde hair, and a smile that belonged on magazine covers. She was exactly the type of woman who should be on Donald Fuller's arm. So why did she irritate him so much? "What do you think, baby?" Veronica asked, striking a pose. The mermaid silhouette or the ball gown? Donald barely glanced up from his phone. Whatever you want. Veronica's smile faltered. You said you wanted to be involved in the planning. I'm busy, Veronica. Just pick one. She chose the mermaid dress, but Donald had already forgotten the conversation. His mind was elsewhere, stuck in a loop it had been caught in for 3 years. April, his useless, blind ex-wife. He wondered if she was still living with that pathetic sister of hers, struggling to navigate her little apartment, probably working some menial job that pitted her disability. The thought should have satisfied him. Instead, it gnawed at him like an infection. Donald, are you even listening to me? Veronica's voice cut through his thoughts. She stood in the doorway of his office, arms crossed, her expression a mixture of frustration and hurt. What is it now? Donald snapped. The florist needs to know if we want peonies or roses. The band needs the final song list. The caterer. Handle it, Donald said dismissively. That's what wedding planners are for. Veronica's jaw tightened. This is our wedding, Donald. Our day? Don't you care? Donald looked at her properly for the first time in the conversation. Beautiful, yes. But there was something missing. April used to anticipate his needs before he voiced them. April knew how he liked his coffee, understood his business pressures, never complained when he worked late. April had been perfect, until she wasn't. April would have handled this without bothering me, Donald muttered, returning to his laptop. Veronica's face went pale. Excuse me. Donald waved his hand dismissively. Nothing. Just handle the wedding details, Veronica. That's all I'm asking. But it wasn't nothing, and they both knew it. Donald had been comparing Veronica to April for months. The way April used to arrange his schedule so efficiently. The way April never wore too much perfume. The way April understood that Donald's image required a specific type of presentation. Veronica tried. She really did. But she wasn't April, and Donald resented her for it. The wedding preparations continued, each detail more extravagant than the last. Donald spared no expense. The Grand Peninsula Hotel's largest ballroom, a guest list of 500, a 12-piece orchestra, flowers flown in from Holland. It would be the social event of the season, covered by every society page in New York. But as the invitations were being finalized, an idea took root in Donald's mind. A cruel, satisfying idea that made him smile for the first time in weeks. He called his assistant. Jennifer, I need you to track down an address for April Waits. My ex-wife. Jennifer hesitated. Sir, is that? Just do it, Donald snapped. 2 days later, Jennifer placed a note on his desk with April's address. Donald stared at it, satisfaction warming his chest. Brooklyn, a modest neighborhood. Exactly what he'd expected. She was probably barely scraping by, living off whatever meager settlement he'd given her, struggling with her disability and obscurity. The thought filled him with vindictive pleasure. Donald personally wrote April's invitation in elegant script on thick cardstock embossed with gold. He could have typed it, but he wanted her to feel the texture of his success, even if she couldn't see it. And then, in his own hand, he added a personal note that made him chuckle. Dear April, I do hope you can attend. Come and see what true happiness looks like. Perhaps it will inspire you. Best, Donald. He sealed the invitation in a cream envelope and marked it for special delivery. That evening, Veronica found him in unusually high spirits, humming as he poured himself scotch. You seem happy, she observed cautiously. I am, Donald said, swirling his drink. Everything is falling into place perfectly. What he didn't tell Veronica was that the wedding had suddenly become much more than a social event. It had become an opportunity, a stage, a chance to show April Waits exactly what she'd lost when he discarded her. He imagined her receiving the invitation, running her fingers over the expensive paper, having someone read his note to her. He imagined the shame, the envy, the crushing realization that while he'd moved on to bigger and better things, she'd been left behind in darkness. Donald Fuller raised his glass to his reflection in the window, the Manhattan skyline glittering behind him like a crown. To revenge, he whispered. The sweetest victory of all. He couldn't wait to see the look on April's face when she walked into his wedding. If she could even find her way there. The thought made him laugh out loud, cold and satisfied, echoing through the empty penthouse. The invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon, delivered by special courier to April's office at April Tech Solutions headquarters. Her assistant, Jennifer, a different Jennifer than Donald's, April thought with bitter irony, brought it to her desk, describing the expensive cardstock and gold embossing with barely concealed disgust. "It's from Donald Fuller," Jennifer said carefully. "Should I read it to you?" April's hands stilled on her keyboard. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in years. Michael knew about Donald, of course, but they never discussed him. He was ancient history, a painful chapter that had led to better things. "Yes," April said quietly. "Read it." Jennifer read the invitation details. The Grand Peninsula Hotel, black tie, a guest list that read like a who's who of New York society. Then she reached the personal note, and her voice hardened with anger. "Come and see what true happiness looks like. Perhaps it will inspire you." April sat back in her chair, a strange calm settling over her. She heard Jennifer's sharp intake of breath, the rustle of paper as her assistant crumpled the invitation in fury. That arrogant, cruel. Jennifer caught herself. "I'm sorry, Ms. Waits. I shouldn't have." "It's fine," April said softly. "Call my sister, please. Ask her to come to the office." Sarah arrived 30 minutes later, and the moment Jennifer read her the invitation, she exploded. "That bastard. That absolute bastard. He throws you away like garbage, and now he wants to parade his new wife in front of you? He wants to humiliate you." "That's exactly what he wants," April agreed, her voice eerily calm. "You're not going." Sarah's tone left no room for argument. "April, you don't need to subject yourself to this. He's a monster. He doesn't deserve." "I'm going." The words hung in the air. Sarah fell silent, stunned. "You're what?" April stood, walking to her office window. She couldn't see the Manhattan skyline, but she could feel the city's energy humming through the glass. Her city, the one she'd conquered on her own terms. "He wants to mock my blindness," April said, a smile playing at her lips. "I will show him my vision." Sarah stared at her sister, seeing something fierce and unshakable in April's expression. "You're serious?" "Completely." April turned, her hand finding her desk with practiced ease. "Donald thinks I'm living in poverty, struggling to survive. He thinks my blindness destroyed me. He wants me to walk into that ballroom broken and ashamed, so he can feel superior. So he can confirm to himself that he made the right choice. So why give him what he wants?" April's smile widened. "Because I'm not going to give him what he wants. I'm going to give him the truth. And the truth, Sarah, is going to destroy him." The preparation began immediately. April called Elena Rodriguez, the most sought-after stylist in New York, someone she'd met at a Forbes summit. Elena arrived at April's penthouse. Yes, penthouse, the one she'd bought with her own money, 3 times the size of Donald's, with an army of assistants and a mission. "You want to make a statement," Elena said, understanding immediately. "You want to walk in there and stop hearts." "Exactly," April confirmed. They chose an emerald gown, silk that moved like water, with a neckline that was elegant and powerful. Dark designer sunglasses from Gucci. Her white cane, but one custom designed by a luxury brand, inlaid with subtle silver detail that caught the light. Her wedding rings from Michael, platinum and diamonds that spoke of real love, not purchased affection. "You look like a queen," Elena breathed when April was fully dressed. April also arranged for a limousine. Not just any car, but a sleek black Rolls-Royce with a professional chauffeur. She'd arrive like the CEO she was, like the woman who'd built an empire from nothing. But the final, most important decision came that evening, as she sat with Michael and their twin boys, James and Joe, now 3 years old, identical and beautiful, with April's delicate features and Michael's warm smile. "I want to bring the twins," April said. Michael looked up from where he was playing blocks with the boys. "To Donald's wedding?" "Yes." April's voice was firm. "He needs to see them. He needs to see what he'll never have. Love. Family. Children who are cherished, not used as accessories. He sent that invitation to humiliate me. I'm going to show him that his cruelty gave me the greatest gift of my life, freedom to find real happiness." Michael crossed the room, kneeling beside April's chair, taking her hand. "Are you sure? I don't want those boys exposed to that man's toxicity." "They won't be," April promised. "We'll walk in, make our statement, and leave. 10 minutes, maximum. But Donald needs to see them. He needs to see everything he threw away." Michael kissed her hand. "Then we'll be there. All of us." On the morning of the wedding, April stood in her bedroom, the emerald gown perfect, her cane in hand, her sons dressed in miniature cream suits that Elena had custom-made. Sarah was crying, proud, fierce tears. "You're going to walk in there and break him," Sarah whispered. April smiled, serene and powerful. "No," she corrected. "I'm going to walk in there and show him he never broke me." "That's so much worse." The limousine waited downstairs, black and gleaming. April Chun, no longer April Waits, no longer Donald Fuller's cast-off, was ready. The Grand Peninsula Hotel ballroom glittered like a jewel box. Crystal chandeliers cast prismatic light across 500 guests dressed in their finest. The 12-piece orchestra played softly as society's elite sipped champagne and admired the extravagant floral arrangements, white roses and peonies that had cost more than most people's cars. Donald Fuller stood at the altar in a custom Tom Ford tuxedo, his chest swelling with satisfaction. Everything was perfect. The venue, the guest list, the bride waiting in the preparation room. This was his moment, his triumph, his public declaration that he was untouchable. And somewhere in this crowd, if she dared to come, was April, ready to witness his victory. He scanned the guests, searching for a blind woman stumbling on someone's arm, looking small and defeated. He couldn't wait to see her face. Well, not her face exactly. She couldn't see his success. But he'd see hers, and that would be enough. The orchestra swelled into the processional. Guests rose from their seats. Veronica would appear any moment, walking down the aisle in her $1,000 dress, and this wedding would cement Donald Fuller's place at the pinnacle of New York society. Then the music stopped. Not a natural pause, a complete, abrupt silence that rippled through the ballroom like a shockwave. Guests turned toward the entrance, gasps and whispers spreading like wildfire. A sleek black Rolls-Royce had pulled up to the red carpet, its chrome gleaming in the afternoon sun. Donald's heart stopped. The chauffeur, dressed in full livery, stepped out and opened the rear door with practiced grace. A hand emerged first, elegant, steady, adorned with platinum rings that caught the light. Then April stepped out. Donald's mind went blank. This couldn't be April. April was broken, helpless, poor. But this woman wore an emerald silk gown that probably cost $10,000. Her blonde hair swept into an elegant twist that belonged on a magazine cover. Designer sunglasses. A white cane that looked more like a fashion accessory than a mobility aid. But it was the two small hands gripping hers that made the entire ballroom freeze. Twin boys. Identical. No older than 3. Dressed in cream suits with bow ties, their golden hair perfectly styled, their faces bright with excitement. April moved forward, guided by her sons and the chauffeur, walking with serene confidence. She didn't stumble, didn't hesitate. She walked like a woman who owned the world. The guests parted like water, staring in stunned silence. Donald felt Veronica's hand grip his arm, her nails digging into his skin. "Donald," she whispered, her voice tight with confusion and growing anger. Who was that woman? Who are those children? Donald couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. This wasn't possible. April was supposed to be struggling, suffering, alone. Not this vision of power and grace, and, God help him, wealth. April reached the center of the aisle, stopping precisely where the acoustics would carry her voice to every corner of the ballroom. Her son stood on either side of her, small hands still clasped in hers. "Hello, Donald," April said, her voice clear and strong. The entire ballroom held its breath. "April," Donald croaked, his face draining of color. "What are you? How did you? Who are those boys?" Veronica demanded, stepping forward. Her bouquet trembled in her grip. "Donald, who are they?" April tilted her head toward Veronica's voice, a slight smile playing on her lips. "These are my sons, James and Joe. They're 3 years old. Twins." She paused, letting the information sink in. "I'm April Chin now, CEO of April Tech Solutions. Perhaps you've heard of it." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Several guests pulled out their phones, clearly searching the company name. Donald heard fragments of whispers. "Worth millions, Forbes feature, revolutionary technology." This couldn't be happening. April turned her attention back to Donald, her voice rising just enough to ensure every guest heard every word. "I received your invitation, Donald. You wanted me to come and see what true happiness looks like." Her smile widened, serene and devastating. So I brought mine with me. She gestured to her sons, to herself, to the obvious evidence of her success. I may have lost my sight, Donald, but I found my clarity. I am no longer a liability. I never was. You were just too blind to see it. The ballroom erupted in gasps and whispers. Cameras flashed as society bloggers captured every moment. Veronica stood frozen, her face cycling through shock, comprehension, and finally, fury. She turned slowly to Donald, whose face had gone from pale to crimson. You invited your ex-wife to our wedding? Her voice shook. You invited her to humiliate her? Veronica, I can explain. You compared me to her for months. Veronica's voice rose, years of resentment exploding. You talked about her constantly, and now I see why. You're still obsessed with her. You're still trying to prove something to her. This wedding. She looked around at the extravagant display. This whole thing was never about us. It was about her. That's not true. Veronica ripped the veil from her head and threw it at Donald's feet. This wedding is over. She turned and walked down the aisle, her heels clicking against marble, the train of her dress billowing behind her. Her bridesmaids scrambled to follow. Donald stood alone at the altar, 500 pairs of eyes staring at him, phones recording his humiliation. He looked at April, who remained calm and composed, her sons pressed close to her sides. You did this, Donald hissed. You ruined. No, Donald. April interrupted, her voice soft but carrying. You did this. For years ago when you chose cruelty over compassion. Today, you simply got to see the consequences. She turned, guided by her chauffeur and her sons, and walked back down the aisle. The crowd parted again, but this time with respect, even admiration. The Rolls-Royce door closed with a soft click, and Donald Fuller stood alone at his ruined wedding, finally understanding what he'd lost. If you're enjoying April's incredible journey of transformation and triumph, don't forget to like this story and follow for more inspiring tales of resilience. The fallout was spectacular and swift. By evening, video footage of April's entrance had gone viral. Social media exploded with commentary, some sympathetic to Donald, most decidedly not. The New York Post ran a front-page story, Billionaire's wedding disaster. Ex-wife shows up, bride walks out. Page 6 devoted an entire spread to the drama, complete with photos of April's stunning arrival and Donald's humiliated expression. But it was the think pieces that truly destroyed him. Forbes published an article titled The Hidden Cost of Cruelty, How Donald Fuller's Treatment of His Disabled Ex-Wife Reveals Toxic Leadership. The piece detailed his divorce from April, the insulting settlement, and questioned whether someone who'd shown such callousness toward a vulnerable spouse could be trusted to lead a major corporation. Fuller Enterprises stock dropped 6% in 2 days. Investors started making phone calls. Board members requested emergency meetings. Clients quietly began looking elsewhere. Donald's carefully constructed empire, built on image, power, and control, started crumbling like sand. Veronica released a statement through her publicist. I cannot marry someone who invited his ex-wife to our wedding with the intention of humiliating her. That level of cruelty is incompatible with the man I thought I knew. She returned the engagement ring and moved out of the Plaza Hotel suite Donald had paid for. Donald sat alone in his penthouse, the same space where he'd once discarded April, watching his reputation dissolve in real time on his laptop screen. His phone buzzed constantly with reporters requesting comment, friends distancing themselves, business associates expressing concern. He'd lost Veronica, his reputation, his social standing, everything he'd worked for, gone in one catastrophic afternoon. This story shows how karma works in the most unexpected ways. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss an update on stories like April's. 3 days after the wedding disaster, Donald picked up his phone with shaking hands. He'd been drinking, too much, probably, but he didn't care. There was only one person who could fix this. Only one person who could release a statement, smooth things over, help him salvage what remained of his image. He dialed April's office number. April Tech Solutions, how may I direct your call? The receptionist's voice was professional and pleasant. April Chun, please. This is Donald Fuller. A pause. 1 moment, sir. The hold music felt like an eternity. Then April's voice came on the line, calm and measured. Hello, Donald. April. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat, trying to regain composure. April, we need to talk. Do we? Yes. This whole situation, it's gotten out of hand. The media, they're twisting everything, making me look like a monster. You need to release a statement. Tell them it was a misunderstanding, that there's no hard feelings, that. No. The word was simple, final, devastating. What? Donald stood, pacing his penthouse. April, you don't understand. My company is suffering. My reputation is destroyed. You could fix this with one statement. One interview. Tell them I'm not the villain they're making me out to be. April's voice remained eerily calm. But you are, Donald. You invited me to your wedding specifically to humiliate me. You wanted me to see your success while you imagined me struggling in poverty. You wanted to mock my blindness. Those aren't media distortions. Those are facts. I was angry. You have to understand. The divorce, it was difficult. The divorce was difficult for you? April's voice finally showed emotion. Not anger, but something sadder. Pity. Donald, you threw me out with $50,000 after 6 years of marriage. You called me a liability because I lost my sight. You treated my disability as a personal inconvenience. And 4 years later, you still couldn't let it go. You still needed to prove you'd won. April, please. I am not responsible for your actions, Donald. I am not responsible for the consequences of your cruelty. You made choices. You showed the world who you truly are. If you don't like what they see, that's not my problem to fix. So you're just going to let me burn? Donald's voice rose, desperation bleeding through. After everything I gave you, the life I provided? Find your own clarity, Donald. April's voice was gentle now, almost kind. I found mine. It's time you found yours. The line went dead. Donald stood in his empty penthouse, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to silence. Around him, the space that had once represented the pinnacle of success now felt like a mausoleum. Beautiful, expensive, and utterly lifeless. He'd lost everything. And unlike April, who'd lost her sight and built an empire, Donald had nothing to build with. No resilience. No character. No clarity. Just the hollow, crushing weight of his own arrogance. Don't let this be the end of the journey. Like and follow for more powerful stories of people who turned their darkest moments into their greatest triumphs. April's story proves that true strength comes from within, and karma always finds its mark. Meanwhile, across the city in a bright, warm brownstone in Park Slope, April sat in her living room surrounded by the true wealth of her life. Michael was reading a bedtime story to James and Joe, his voice animated and full of laughter. Her sister Sarah sat beside her, their hands clasped in comfortable silence. April's company continued to grow, changing lives every day with technology that gave people like her dignity and independence. Her sons were healthy, happy, loved beyond measure. Her husband valued her for exactly who she was. She'd lost her sight 4 years ago and thought it was the end of her world. Instead, it had been the beginning. Donald Fuller had tried to destroy her, to prove she was worthless without him. But all he'd proven was that she'd never needed him at all. April smiled, listening to her sons giggle at Michael's silly voices, feeling the warmth of Sarah's hand in hers. This was happiness. Real, honest, unshakable happiness. And no amount of money, power, or revenge could ever compare to it. If this story touched your heart or made you believe in the power of resilience, please like, share, and follow for more incredible journeys of transformation. Remember, your worth is never determined by those who fail to see it. Keep shining.